Friends, good evening. I want to welcome you to our dialogue. I am thrilled to be joined by Mitch Silber. Mitchell D. Silber is the Executive Director of the Community Security Initiative, CSI, a comprehensive program to protect and enhance the security for Jewish communities and institutions in the New York City metro area. Previously, Mitch served as a Director of Intelligence Analysis at the New York City Police Department, where he was a principal advisor to the Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence on counterterrorism policy and analysis. He's a regular commentator on political risk and terrorism-related issues for several news outlets. The greater New York City metro area Jewish community is home to approximately 1.7 million Jews and 2,500 Jewish institutions, including synagogues, schools, and camps. The Community Security Initiative's mission is to enhance security through coordination with law enforcement, tracking and analyzing online threats, providing security assessments, and more. Mitch, before we even get started, I just want to thank you for your tireless work in keeping our communities safe and for sharing your time and wisdom with us this afternoon/evening.
Thank you.
So it's a home game for you. So it's always.
We were coming to shul anyway.
There you go. So
it was part of the plan.
Yeah. So it's really great to have you here, and I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Sure. What prompted my phone call to you when we reached out last week, obviously, is what happened. I guess it's a week and a half ago now in Washington, D.C. The tragedy of the murders of Sarah and Yaron. So let's start off with that, and then we can talk about the work that you're doing, and we'll have time for some questions. If people have questions, we'll certainly make time for that. So we're a week and a half post the murder of these two individuals. The news cycle has continued, but let's go back. What do we know about this incident? What can you tell us that a week and a half out?
Sure, and there are a lot of things that still remain unknown, things that we want to learn that will help us figure out how do we enhance security going forward, from this event, because these are tragedies, but we're always trying to learn from them. Look, we know this individual, the gunman, and I'm not even going to, pay homage to him by naming him, traveled from Chicago to Washington, D.C., with a firearm in his luggage. As far as we know, he was licensed, so he could have that. So this was not spontaneous. This was something that was planned. This was something that he gave some thought to. And one of the questions that's come up in the immediate aftermath was, well, clearly he was targeting Jews. I'm not quite so sure that was the target he had in mind, because certainly there are plenty of Jewish targets in Chicago. My belief is that he was looking for an Israeli diplomatic target, something related to the embassy, given that he came to Washington. We know that bystanders, saw someone lurking around the Capitol Jewish Museum, which was hosting this event, this interdenominational, interfaith event at the museum for young professionals, for young diplomats. Partially because it was not for the ambassador or for the consul general, someone of that stature, the Israeli embassy didn't have the normal security protocols in place that they would have for a high-level diplomatic person. So the security was left to the Jewish museum there. We understand that they had 4 security guards, 2 that were watching the door, 2 were quote-unquote roving. Still not exactly sure what that meant. Were they roving indoors? Were they roving outside? But again, bystanders saw an individual outside smoking a cigarette, looking like he was waiting around outside. When Yaron and Sarah and 2 other individuals exited from the event a little bit after 9 p.m., the gunman opened fire on them, and killing Yaron and Sarah. And then in the confusion of it all, placed his gun somewhere outside and found himself inside the museum. And then as people noticed him, seemingly off, at a certain point he said, "I did it." And he pulled out a keffiyeh from somewhere on his body and waved it around and said, "Free Palestine." So, he was deliberate in the way he went about all of this. And, to my mind, as a terrorism analyst, looking at political violence, he wanted to be caught. He wanted his message, he was speaking to the world in his message. And his message obviously was Free Palestine, and by enabling himself to be picked up so easy, that was part of what he was trying to achieve, because obviously he could have run away. Who goes inside after you've committed a crime? So not a criminal, a terrorist.
So what do we know about him? I mean, was there a manifesto? Did he do some writing? Did I read that there was some manifesto?
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of his motives or his mindset?
Yeah, there was a manifesto, and the manifesto was released approximately 45 minutes after the attack. And we don't know if he set it up, like a timed email, or, what was the logic, or did somebody else send it out? But, unfortunately, in the job that my team and I focus on, we're looking for what's called leakage in the counterterrorism world, where there's some information that suggests someone's about to carry out an attack. So far, we haven't seen any evidences or any leakage that you could have detected him. To compare it and contrast it to the Tree of Life, in 2018, the gunman in that situation was increasingly posting rhetoric that was escalatory, and he had been concerned about the caravans coming from Mexico and immigrants, and that's what drove him to action. So we don't see any of that leakage. But yeah, so this manifesto was released, and in looking at the manifesto, he talks about him being involved in protest activity. And he makes the analytic point that so far it hasn't worked, right? 20 months after October 7th, he hasn't changed, nor has the protest movement changed Israeli foreign policy, military policy. It hasn't changed US foreign policy. So, and again, we've seen this in the terrorism world, where people emerge from peaceful protest activity if they feel like they're not achieving their political end goals. So he says in the manifesto it was quote unquote ineffective, and he wanted to bring the war home, right? So to me, he's bringing the war home. He's envisioning himself as part of this war, and the war's at home, and that kind of leads me down that road to the conclusion that he was looking for an Israeli governmental target. That's who you fight in your war, right? You fight people who are representatives from the other side. The manifesto talks about a former US military officer who self-immolated, lit himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington in about February or so, and he holds that person up on a pedestal. This is someone to be emulated. He took that act of escalating, from peaceful protest, and he wanted to do something in line with that. So those are some of the things we know about from the manifesto. The other thing I would say is that ideologically, is this neo-Nazi? Is this, Hamas, ISIS, jihadist? Is this black Israelite, which unfortunately have been 3 different ideological strains, have been responsible for deadly attacks in the US? No, it's none of those things. Actually, this is a left-wing extremist. And that's where his motivation, comes from.
So let's stay on that for a second, because I've heard you speak about this in another context. The uniqueness of this act, coming violence from the left. Can you say a little more about that? What makes... I also want to put a pin on something you said about was he targeting Jews or Israelis? So let's come back to that.
Yeah.
But I want to stay on the individual who committed these murders. What makes this act unique in what we've seen in the last 18 months, if anything?
Right. Well, look, we've all observed the protest activity in the streets and the protest activity on campus. And, there's been this difficult decision, this difficult situation. How much of very objectionable free speech do you allow? Does the NYPD allow? Does Columbia University, does Harvard University allow? And, are there any consequences to allowing free speech that ultimately, turn to violence? And this person emerged from that protest movement, that there is a genocide going on in Gaza. Israel is the bad actor in this situation. Israel is the Nazis in this situation. And, coming from this very almost Marxist, socialist perspective, and we haven't had left-wing extremist violence, terrorism in the United States in a long time. The Weathermen, kind of an outgrowth of the Vietnam War, 60s, 70s. In Europe, they had the Red Army faction. In the US, the left-wing violent extremists, thankfully, that piece of the spectrum has been dormant in terms of violence. In 2017, there was a shooting attack against some Republican congressmen as they were playing softball in DC. That was probably the last incident like this. So unfortunately, as the Jewish community looks at this, it's coming at us from all different. It's a perfect storm: right-wing extremists, left-wing extremists, Islamist extremism, and it just makes the counterterrorism practitioner or analyst's role that much more difficult because you're looking at full spectrum threats.
All right. So, what do you're an analyst. What does this tell us, right? I mean, coming from the left, you're monitoring a variety of chat rooms, I assume, and online activity. What are you seeing, hearing, either leading up to this or in reaction to this violence coming from the protest movement?
Right. Well, it comes back home here to New York, right? We have a mayoral primary coming up in a few weeks, and not to get overtly political here, but a group in New York is called the Democrat Socialists of America, the DSA, and what there's been over the last week and a half is a debate within the DSA, and the DSA falls on that far left wing side of the political spectrum. Should we endorse this attack, this deadly terrorist attack against these two Israeli diplomats? Was it justified? Now, the DSA has come out against it, but there was a pretty robust debate within this political entity, and there's a mayoral candidate who has the support of the DSA. This individual is Zoran Mamdani. So these things are all connected. And my personal view is the fact that the DSA had to have a debate about this in terms of what's the party plank, good or bad, killing two Israeli diplomats in Washington, D.C. To me, it's unfathomable that there's a debate on this issue.
Or just even murdering in protest, right? Like that's one level, and then the other level, of course, is they have to be Jews or Israelis or. And he's polling reasonably well too. Right?
Polling reasonably well, and some recent polling activity shows he's got 20% support among New York City Jewish voters, who I just hope haven't spent a lot of time on it yet, and will get more educated as to his policy positions.
Right. So we've got some work to do there. Yeah. Any other reflections about online activity post the murders? Any?
You're searching the ocean for a needle, and it's so difficult to find. And we're fortunate, when we do find it, I mean the collective Jewish security organizations around the United States, not just CSI here in New York. We're dependent on the FBI and the NYPD and other law enforcement partners. Sometimes we do find these things, and personally. You find it, you move on, great, but you don't reflect on what was the consequence of not finding it. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those situations where, could this have been detected in some way, shape, or form? So far I don't see how.
Okay. I want to probe just a little more on this individual. As I mentioned, you referenced he may not have come, or he wasn't coming targeting Jews, but Israeli diplomats. What role does anti-Semitism play in this, in your opinion? Right. I mean, I'm not one to really separate anti-Semitism from anti-Zionism, but that's a whole other conversation. Right. You're right, he could have targeted Jews in Chicago, right? There's plenty of targets, but he came here. So what do we know he was looking for? What was his mindset towards Jews, towards Israelis, Israel, et cetera?
Yeah, no, look, he wholly adopted this concept of, Israel as a colonizer type state. So very much, I also, say in the real world, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism have really kind of, merged if there was ever any white space between them to begin with. Right? When someone comes to light Governor Josh Shapiro's house on fire on Passover because of Josh Shapiro's positions on Israel, is that anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism, right? So they're essentially merged. But if we want to be more precise, his issue was less with American Jewry, I think, and more with Israel's actions. And framed in this Israel as a colonizer, as a settler state, as illegitimate, and as a genocidal entity, and therefore, in his mind, justified to fight against.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the work you do. Tell us about CSI and how, because you've been with us before, and but I just want to refresh people's memories of the really critical, sacred work you do. So what is CSI? How does it serve the Jewish communities of New York? And I use communities intentionally because you really are all over the community map.
Sure. This was something that, to some degree, New York was late to the game on, because other cities around the country, Boston, LA, Detroit, Cleveland, in the 2000s, set up their own community security program. As a former NYPD official, if you would have said to me in 2010, in 2009, 2012, does the Jewish community of New York need a separate security program? I would have said, why? NYPD, we've got this, right? But in the wake of Tree of Life and Poway and Jersey City and Muncie, UJA and JCRC, and of course, UJA has spoken here a number of times, and our congregation is big supporters of UJA, started to ask the question, maybe we should be doing something more. And in conversations with UJA, I started to tell them what other cities have done, what other cities, communities in Europe are doing to protect themselves. And once we got to the point of Jersey City and Muncie, it was a done deal that we had to create a security program. So here's the problem set: 1.7, 1.8 million Jews, 2,600 institutions. How do you protect it? Mm-hmm. So the way we tried to do this is with a regional security plan. We hired the best and brightest law enforcement veterans from the NYPD, from the New York State Police, from the Israeli Shin Bet, from local police departments in Westchester and Connecticut, and made them regional security directors. So there's a Manhattan regional security director. He's been here a number of times with me, walked through the facility. He's responsible for every shul, school, JCC, camp, museum in his area of responsibility. So he does an assessment of the vulnerabilities. He comes here and does training with the security provider. He makes sure that the location is connected with the local precinct if they're not already connected. When or if there's an incident, swastika on Hebrew Union College yesterday morning, make sure that NYPD Hate Crimes has this information and is responsive. It's kind of that connective tissue with law enforcement. So we have these regional security directors. We have 9 of them. Brooklyn has one, Queens has one, Long Island has one, Westchester and the Bronx have one, and we've expanded. Hudson Valley has one, Rockland, Southwest Connecticut. So we're protecting all these different communities. And then there's an intelligence side to it. And these are brilliant civilian intelligence analysts who are spending their days knee-deep in the sewers of the internet. They are looking on the dark web and Telegram and Gab and X and Facebook and other places to try and find extremists. And they're using government-grade intelligence tools, web scraping tools, artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and they're trying to find the dots and then connect the dots.
So this is a result of Tree of Life, Paul A. Muncie. What happens to CSI on October 7th? How does the mission / priorities change as a result of not just October 7th, but really October 8th, right? What we start seeing in Manhattan, on campuses, all around.
Well, I don't even think we've talked about this, but actually on October 7th, probably a third of our team and I were in Israel.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. We brought 25 New York area law enforcement, senior people, NYPD, Suffolk, Westchester, Rockland, so on and so forth, to Israel to learn about counterterrorism and anti-Semitism. We landed on October 6th, and October 7th, we woke up in Ashdod, running for the bomb shelters. Within 24 hours, Israel had decided to program over, and we managed to leave through Dubai to come back to New York. And many of us felt terrible to leave Israel in its moment of need. But, we were bringing law enforcement people who this wasn't their fight. They didn't sign up for this. They came to see Israel, for many of them, the first time. So the mission was get them back home. But, it was literally out of the fire into the frying pan, because every Jewish institution in the greater New York area, is asking for help. We need more guards. Can you look at our security? We've got a pre-K school. What can we do? So, total tsunami of demand and need. And, again, credit to UJA. They came forward and gave us a huge grant and said, whatever you need resource-wise, we're here for you. So we were able to provide guards to locations who couldn't afford guards normally. And to locations who had one guard, we said, hire a second guard. And we had this surge of security assets all through the end of 2023 into early 2024.
I want to come back to you being in Israel on 10/7, along with, you said 25?
Yeah.
Just what was how did they respond to what they were witnessing in Israel? I mean, you live this.
Yeah.
This is your job, right? They don't know about Israel. They don't know about terrorist attacks. They don't know, they do, but you know what I mean, in terms of the Jewish state. Just was there like any process? You were all together, I assume, right?
Right. We were all together because we were in this hotel in Ashdod, and woken up at 6:30. You go for the stairwell, you go for the safe room that every hotel has on their floors. But ultimately, in between the breaks of missile barrages, we were down in the common area. The first thing we did was, all download Red Alert, right? And then we tried to figure out, when you're in the stairwell of the hotel, who on Twitter to follow, because we don't know what's going on.
Right.
It really was fog of war. And look, as far as we know, and listen, I felt very confident that Iron Dome is going to protect us, but we had no idea that we're 10 miles from Gaza. And there's not much of the Israeli army in between us and them.
Right.
Everyone's family is waking up in New York, seeing what's going on TV, calling their spouses, their significant others in Israel. People were afraid.
Yeah.
There were people who, were having high anxiety, and you were just trying to calm them down as best we could. And, the Israelis, even our host didn't know what was going on. At noon that day, they thought the program will continue.
Right.
En bayah. This thing's, we had no idea.
It's probably better that you didn't have as much information as you might have if you were on WhatsApp chats with kibbutz members, right? Because there was, who knew what was really happening in real time. Wow, I didn't know that.
And just to your point about what were they thinking, on the bus ride the next day, on October 8th, as we're going to Ben Gurion, we're driving on the highway north, and you're seeing masses of cars parked on the side of the road, on both sides of the highway. And, we're asking the bus driver, what is this? They're saying, listen, these are the reservists. They haven't even been called up yet, but they're showing up at their military bases because they know they need to be called up. And I think that really spoke to the American law enforcement, members of the group, because they understood this idea that, when the call comes for help, if you're the police chief of, Scarsdale or Yorktown or Pleasantville or in Nassau County or Suffolk County or NYPD, you go toward the direction of the fight. You don't go away from it. And they saw these Israeli citizens showing up in mass, to do their service, and that connected with them. And just a coda to this is one of the things I was working on today is that the trip is back on, and hopefully, God willing, we're going in September to take almost everyone back to Israel.
It's an amazing story, Mitch. Really. Let's stay on CSI for just one more second. I just want to try to illustrate the work you do. Give us, if you can, all right? I don't know what is, sort of redacted, top secret, but can you share with us an example of a moment when CSI prevented or mitigated a threat?
Sure, yeah, there's one, relevant to the east side of Manhattan that just happened in February. These things always happen on a Friday. It's just the way it goes. So Friday at 1 o'clock, the head of our intel desk interrupts me on a Zoom and says, listen, I need to speak to you, it's urgent. So one of our analysts has found a threat against Central Synagogue. And, they immediately notify NYPD with the very initial information that it seems to be someone who dropped out of Marine officer training, but he's from Utah. Okay, we pass it to NYPD, and they detected it, they continue to investigate it. An hour later, NYPD calls us back and says, okay, look, we've done some more digging on this person, he owns some firearms, which, is disturbing. And then about an hour later, they say, listen, we were able to get a search warrant and we're tracking this person. And he was in Ohio this morning. He's from Utah and he's leaving the Philadelphia area. So at that point, it became a whole nother level of real because it seems like NYPD said he's coming to New York. So, we were speaking with the clergy at Central. I was speaking with Angela, and she said, should we have services? And I said, I think you should, because honestly, Central is going to be the most well-protected location in all of New York City. No one's going to get through. Go ahead with services. And I was in touch with the security team there as well. And as we thought about it, we said, okay, you know what? This person, if they get into New York City, they may see this phalanx of NYPD in front of Central. They may drive up Madison Avenue. They might come to Park Avenue or to Fifth Avenue or to Sutton or Park East. So let's put out a be on the lookout for this person with his picture to every synagogue in Manhattan on Friday. So at that point, it's already 4 o'clock. So we're getting this out there and speaking with NYPD, my former colleagues, and they say, listen, we've got a plan. We're going to try and intercept them, they're telling me, on the Jersey side of the Lincoln Tunnel. We know the make and model of his vehicle, and let's see if that works. So that was at 4:30, and then 4:35, 4:40, 4:45, 4:50, 4:55. Finally, or 5:55, I should say. They call me. We've got him. We arrested him. He was driving a Ford F-150. We believe his intent was to do one of those vehicular attacks like we saw New Year's Day in New Orleans, but at 55th and Lex. And we all know how many people would be walking on 55th and Lex at 5:55 on a Friday evening. So thankfully, our team detected it. Thankfully, NYPD, sprung into action in cooperation with Port Authority and New York and New Jersey State Police. They stopped this individual. He's been indicted by the Manhattan DA's office. So this case, is rolling forward. But yeah, so that was kind of a hold your breath success that the team had, and the operational side played a role. So it was one
great partnership with
amazing partnership.
Yeah. Let's open up to some questions we have a microphone. We're going to start over here. I'll channel Rabbi Cosgrove. Questions or statements that end with a question mark. All right, and then we'll work our way around. And
I have a question. There was a lawsuit that was filed that said that some organization on October 7th posted something on Instagram saying, "We're back." And I don't know if that was right before the attacks or right after. It was like within minutes. Do you know anything about that situation?
Yeah, this rabbi slash attorney, I think his name is Mark Goldfeder, has launched this lawsuit, and he cites that piece of evidence, and the question is, what is the relationship of these pro-Palestinian, frankly pro-Hamas protest groups in New York City and around the country to Hamas itself, the terrorist organization, right? Because Hamas is a declared foreign terrorist organization by the federal government, which means that if you provide material support, and material support is traditionally money, weapons, yourself, right? If you provide that to the organization, that's a material support, and that's a terrorism charge. So he is making the argument that there's some type of communication cooperation between these protest groups, organizations in New York and nationally with Hamas, a terrorist organization, as a way to go after them. And we're into legal questions here as to what is the nature of cooperation and what is the nature of support. And we'll see how this plays out, but it is a damning piece of evidence for this group. I believe it was the group at Columbia, who basically was kind of, not active, and then suddenly activated within minutes before any of us even really knew the attack had happened on 10/7. So how did that happen? So I think that's the crux of that lawsuit, and I'm glad it's being brought.
Let's go back there, Lori. There was a hand. I think Karen has a question, and then we'll go back over here.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this conversation. I feel like this is going to be a PSA, and never envisioned that I would have this opportunity to do this. I'm Karen Kasner. I'm on the board of JCRC of New York, seasoned and termed out board member of UJA Federation. If I may say, this primary here in New York is more important now than ever. Whoever is elected on the Democratic ticket probably will be the next mayor. And you really need to become educated about who the candidates are. The candidate that Mitch referred to, this Zohan Madani, is dangerous. Not only is he supported by the DSA, Socialist. If you look up him or even read the New York Post today, where they say there's going to be a mass exodus of any wealthy person from New York, he has supported any anti-Israel, anti-Jewish legislation proposals up in Albany. His prior statements have not been anything that aligns with our values. There's another candidate there who is also, I can't mention who, but they're on the city council, brought up, huh? Yes, yes. I can say has supported an anti-Israel proposal. So it's incumbent upon us to not only be educated about these candidates, but importantly to impress in email all of your friends, your network, your business colleagues who are eligible to vote, what the dates are for early voting, because I think the primary is smack in the middle of when a lot of people may be traveling, and every vote is going to count, and that primary, as I said, is going to dictate who is going to be the next mayor. June, right?
June 24th.
No, but June 13th and 14th are going to be get out the vote in the synagogues. You're going to be getting materials if you are here. I don't know if it's going to be emailed through the synagogue and can be, or it's going to be literature here. But I ask you to go online and look up about the candidates and make sure not only each of you vote, but any eligible person do. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our kids, and we owe it to our grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Let's come back over here, Rabbi. We've got two questions on this side.
I read a lot about the murders, and some people comparing this guy to Luigi Manion, in the sense that this was different because he was turned, this guy, not to the same extent, has been turned into somewhat of a folk hero afterwards by certain groups. Was the Luigi Mangione thing sort of a game changer, and is that, with social media, is that changing the stage for some of these lone wolf attackers? Is that how has that changed your radar and assessments?
I think what's changed is the response afterward. You know, I think we're all accustomed from seeing when there's a suicide bomber in Israel that in certain parts of the West Bank or Gaza, that person would be lionized. There would be posters of them. And now it's part of the process of making them a hero. And that's what happened with Mangione. People made him into this folk hero on social media, and that was remarkable and horrifying simultaneously. And the concern was, is this going to motivate other people to, quote unquote, copycat him? And what we're seeing with the gunman at the Capitol Jewish Museum, a similar phenomena. On social media, they have him in a robe and a halo, like he's a saint. And there's such a perverted sickness to people doing this. And of course, you know, on social media, anything goes, right? But the idea that he's being lionized as some type of, you know, revolutionary hero leading, you know, Gaza to victory, that's the imagery, that's the iconography that's out there on him. And this is what our analysts and people are observing online. And look, it's not a long step from that to someone says, hey, I want to be famous like him. Right? So it's about this fame phenomena, and we saw how Hamas used this. You know, other people became suicide bombers because they wanted the fame. And it's not a suicide bombing, but it's a killing and it's a terrorist act. And that fame phenomena, because, you know, looking at terrorists and what's one of the things that motivate them, they want to be the hero of their own story. Right? So this plays right into that hero element, that hero narrative, and that's really problematic.
Yeah. We'll come up front then, okay? We'll take one
Thank
more.
you for speaking. There's a lot of question marks right now as to the nonprofit security grant program and as to whether or not the federal government will continue funding it. And I'm curious how that will affect, A, your work, and what we will be noticing on a communal level.
Sure, and just to give everyone some background, there's this great program that FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security run. It's called the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. And what it means is that Park Avenue Synagogue can have a CSI regional security director look at the doors, look at the windows, look at the CCTV cameras and say, listen, these are the vulnerabilities, right? And let's put that in a report. Let's send it to Homeland Security. And if it's deemed significantly vulnerable enough, then you can win a grant of $150,000 to improve the security. By the way, Park Avenue is light years beyond almost any synagogue in the New York area in terms of how secure it is. So, you know, shouldn't worry from that standpoint. But a lot of institutions really rely on that grant. Last year, $43 million came to New York State synagogues, shuls, JCCs, camps, museums from the federal government to make those improvements. With all of the, I guess the technical term is mishigas in Washington, the program, the people, we haven't found out who won 2024 grants. And therefore, since we haven't found out who won, they haven't gotten the money, and therefore they haven't made the enhancements. So, you know, the program, we're hearing that it's being unfrozen, and that the winners will be notified soon. And we're also hearing that the 2025 grant window will open again. It'll be short, but it'll be there. But it is an ongoing issue because, you know, the administration can't figure out if FEMA is good or bad, if they want to give money to FEMA or not, and this falls under that. So, you know, UJA, Jewish Federations of North America, ADL, any Jewish communal organization that has a lobbying capability in Washington is pressing all the buttons they can in the Senate, in the House. There have been hearings to say, yes, This is really important. We need to have stronger doors and film on the windows and CCTV cameras and 50% subsidy for guards outside. So it's a really important program. It's unfortunate that it's gotten caught up in Doge and everything else that's gone on in Washington. I'm hoping that things loosen and this money gets freed up soon.
Great. Let's take one more question right here, and then we'll wrap up.
I'm assuming there was a security team in DC at that event. Is that team being blamed for not noticing the guy pacing back and forth in front of the building?
I think, look, it's early and we don't have all the information. I want to be very careful not to place blame anywhere. What we understand is that Washington, D.C. Metro Police was not there. I don't know if the museum told D.C. Metro Police we're having this event. Certainly our guidance here to the community has always been, and we've re-upped it since last Wednesday, if you're having an event, make sure you tell us so we can tell the police so there can be a car there with lights flashing, because that might deter someone to go somewhere else. We know there were these 4 security guards. We know they were from a private sector company. It doesn't seem like they were as situationally as aware as they should have been. There was a bystander who saw something, and the mantra is, if you see something, say something. This person didn't say something. These are just some of the things that we've initially heard that are problematic. So clearly things went wrong. Where exactly the blame lies, it's still being sorted out, but there'll definitely be an after action on this. The FBI is looking into it. We speak regularly with the Washington, D.C. Federation Security Director. We're speaking to the Executive Director for the museum. If there's as soon as things are being learned, we're learning it here in New York.
Yeah, and it has been, it's been gala season here as well, so I'm sure you've been very busy. I want to give you an opportunity to wrap up. You know more than most about what's happening in the world in terms of threats and violence and hate. There are probably times you feel you know too much. What both keeps you sort of metaphorically up at night, or maybe even literally up at night, and what gives you hope as we are, moving into the future?
Sure. On the negative side first, what keeps me up at night is that the idea that some people are saying, oh, this is a globalized intifada. I think that's imprecise. The intifada is literally an uprising, and that's not what we're seeing. But it is kind of like a global insurgency. I speak to our colleagues in Melbourne, Australia. I speak to London, Jewish security programs. And, you see it on the news too. What's the statement? We're all Parisian Jews now. There is this low-level insurgency around the world against Jews, against Israel. And, this is what is going on. So it is now required all of these new and additional defensive procedures and standards that, I got a call this week from a friend that said, hey, my daughter's getting married downtown. Should I have an armed guard there? I said, are you or the groom's couple in the public domain? No, but you never know. There could be someone who hears it's a Jewish wedding and he works, behind the scenes at the catering hall. And look, you can't dismiss that as an irrational fear. I think it's a highly unlikely, but that's the situation we're in at the moment. That said, I think that the Jewish communities in New York, in the United States, in Australia, the UK, we are connected. We have government support. We have law enforcement support. I mean, the partnerships that we have, that we talked about during this conversation, have been phenomenal. I don't think the Jewish people, in our history have had such a strong relationship with our governmental and law enforcement partners the way we do now in 2025 in most places around the world. And we have Israel. The conversations and the discussions between us in New York and Israel about security, they're ongoing, and we benefit by Israel's expertise. And, all of those things give me the confidence that, yes, we're in a tough period. This is going to pass. And, unfortunately, we'll be stronger for this. And, maybe members of our community who didn't have such a strong Jewish identity because they were forced to really embrace their Jewish identity, that's going to flourish as a result of this. And maybe that's a silver lining in the post-10/7 world.
Amen. Mitch, I want to thank you for being here tonight. I want to thank you for really all that you and your team do to keep the Jewish community of New York and around the world safe. So thank you and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Services at 6:15 downstairs.
Sure.